When you think of signature NBA moves, you might think of Jordan's fadeaway, Kareem's skyhook, or Hakeem's dream shake. But Bill Laimbeer? His signature moves were elbowing, hip-checking, planting his feet in landing zones, and flopping like a theater actor. He didn't just play basketball, he waged psychological warfare. They called him the Prince of Darkness, the Axe Murderer, Darth Vader of the NBA. And unlike most nicknames, these stuck because they were true. Laimbeer put the bad in bad boy Pistons. He got into fights, so often it became routine. Opponents hated him. Some still do. But here's the twist. Bill Laimbeer wasn't just some goon who threw punches because he couldn't play. In the 1980s, he was the best defensive rebounder in the league. One of the first centers to consistently hit threes. And get this, his free throw percentage was better than Michael Jordan's. He was smart, calculated, and relentless. He said it himself. I don't fight. I agitate, then walk away. Every dirty move had a purpose, to disrupt opponents, mentally and physically. To understand how he became this way, we have to rewind to 1957. Born into privilege, Bill was the son of a high-level executive in a glass manufacturing company. He grew up in the wealthiest parts of Chicago and Los Angeles. In fact, when he joined the NBA, he joked he was probably the only player earning less than his dad. His upbringing made him confident, maybe too confident. He believed he could succeed at anything. And basketball? That just happened to be the path he took. He was 6 feet 11 inches by the time he led his high school to a state title, but he wasn't disciplined. At Notre Dame, he flunked out as a freshman and had to take a detour through a technical college. He didn't return to Notre Dame until junior year, where he posted just 7 points and 6 rebounds a game, nothing eye-catching. So it wasn't a shock when he fell to the third round of the 1979 NBA draft, picked 65th overall by the Cleveland Cavaliers. They didn't even want to sign him at first. Bill Laimbeer's NBA journey didn't start with a bang. It started with hesitation. The Cleveland Cavaliers weren't thrilled with him. He wasn't athletic. He didn't have post moves like Kareem or Moses Malone. He didn't even want to play like a traditional center. While the league was dominated by low-post scorers, Laimbeer wanted to shoot jumpers, like a guard. It didn't sit well with the Cavs, and they delayed offering him a contract. So Laimbeer did something unexpected. He signed with a team in Italy. And there, away from the NBA spotlight, he thrived. Averaging 21 points and 12 rebounds a game, he gained confidence and proved he belonged. 1 year later, he returned to Cleveland, and in his rookie NBA season, he made a strong impression, 10 points and 8 rebounds per game. Not bad for someone labeled too slow and unconventional. But it was in Detroit where his legacy truly began. The Pistons GM, Jack McCloskey, noticed Laimbeer during a regular season game. Even in a blowout loss, Bill was playing hard, fighting for rebounds, battling for position, refusing to quit. That fire caught McCloskey's eye. At the trade deadline, the Pistons brought him in, pairing him with a young, rising star, Isaiah Thomas. It was a match made in chaos. By the 1982-83 season, his first full year in Detroit, Laimbeer was an all-star. He averaged 14 points and 12 rebounds a game. And while the bad boy image hadn't fully formed yet, the seeds were planted. Opponents were already punching him in the face, just for the way he played. And eventually Bill started punching back. As Isaiah Thomas once put it, when Bill got to the Pistons, guys were just turning around and punching him right in the face. But once he started hitting back, that's when it became a problem. But the truth is, Laimbeer wasn't just brawling. He was competing. He barely missed games, played through pain, and pushed his team forward. By 1984, under new head coach Chuck Daly, the Pistons were no longer a joke. They had the best offense in the league and finally made the playoffs after a 7-year drought. Laimbeer's numbers spoke for themselves. 17 points, 12 rebounds, 53% from the field, and a ridiculous 87% from the free throw line as a center. But they lost in the first round. A man named Bernard King put up 42 points a game on them, second most ever in a playoff series at that time. Still, the Pistons were climbing. In 1985, they added Vinnie Johnson. In the playoffs, they swept New Jersey and faced the Boston Celtics, a powerhouse at the time. That's where things got ugly. In Game 3 of the series, Laimbeer got elbowed in the face by Robert Parrish. Then, as Bill stood up, Parrish hit him again. It wasn't just rough, it was personal. Boston fans hated Laimbeer. They thought he deserved it. And that moment was the beginning of a bitter, multi-year feud between the Pistons and the Celtics, a rivalry drenched in blood, bruises, and bad memories. But Detroit wasn't done building. In 1986, they added Joe Dumars in the draft and Rick Mahorn through a trade. Mahorn was just what Laimbeer needed, a physical enforcer to back him up. That season, Laimbeer led the entire league in rebounds, averaging 13 per game, with a solid 16.5 points to go along with it. Despite that, they were eliminated early again, this time by the Hawks. But the Pistons were evolving. They weren't just talented. They were becoming dangerous. The core of Laimbeer, Thomas, Dumars, and Mahorn was forming a new identity. One that didn't care about being liked. One that wasn't afraid to punch back or punch first. And the rest of the NBA was about to feel it. By 1987, the Detroit Pistons were no longer just a scrappy underdog. They were a force of nature, and Bill Laimbeer was their spiritual center. With a core of Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, Rick Mahorn, and a bench that now included a young Dennis Rodman and John Salley, Detroit was deep, nasty, and finally dangerous. They had something to prove, and Laimbeer made sure every opponent felt it. That year, they won a franchise record 52 games. Laimbeer earned his fourth All-Star selection with averages of 15 points, 12 rebounds, and an absurd 89.4% from the free throw line, an NBA record for a center at the time. But his biggest impact wasn't just in stats. It was in chaos. The 1987 Eastern Conference Finals against the Celtics was where the myth of Laimbeer turned into legend and villainy. Game 3. The Pistons were down 0-2. Then came a hard foul from Laimbeer that knocked Larry Bird to the floor. Bird snapped. He threw punches, slammed Laimbeer into the court, and got ejected. The Pistons won the game. Then in Game 5, the infamous Isaiah turnover game, Detroit was up by 1 with just seconds left. All they needed to do was inbound the ball. But Isaiah threw it away, and Boston's Dennis Johnson scored. Celtics win. But the fight wasn't over. In that same game, Robert Parrish once again lost control. Laimbeer had pushed all the right buttons. Parrish punched him twice, right in front of the refs, and still didn't get ejected. But he was suspended for Game 6. Without their enforcer, Boston collapsed, and Detroit forced a Game 7. Burr responded with a vintage performance, and the Celtics survived. But it was clear, the Pistons weren't backing down. Not anymore. That offseason, Detroit changed its philosophy under coach Chuck Daly. They adopted what they called 94 feet defense. Full court pressure, body-to-body contact, constant agitation. No more gentleman's game. No more letting the offense casually bring the ball up court. The Pistons would harass you from the first inbound to the final whistle. And Laimbeer was the face of that aggression. He hip-checked players, threw sneaky elbows, and most controversially, stepped into players' landing zones after they jumped for shots, risking injury. He wasn't just dirty. He was strategic and unapologetic. The Pistons didn't lead the league in technicals, but they led in bruises. And nobody took more of those bruises than Michael Jordan. In the 1988 playoffs, the Pistons knocked out the Washington Bullets and then smothered Jordan and the Bulls. Jordan still got his highlights, but every point came with a price. Cheap shots, clobbering fouls, psychological warfare. Detroit advanced. Next up, a rematch with the Celtics. But this time, Detroit had grown up and grown meaner. Before each game at Boston Garden, Laimbeer would be the first Piston on the court. He'd walk to the center logo, look down at the leprechaun, spit on it, then smear it into the floor with his sneakers. The arena erupted in fury. Celtics fans wanted blood. But the Celtics couldn't retaliate like before. They were aging, injured, and outmatched. Detroit finally beat Boston in 6 games. The Bad Boys were Eastern Conference champions. Then came the 1988 NBA Finals, Detroit versus the Showtime Lakers. And believe it or not, the Pistons nearly won. After 5 games, they led the series 3-2. They were 1 win away from their first title. But disaster struck. In Game 6, Isaiah Thomas severely sprained his ankle, but somehow, he kept playing. On one leg, he scored 25 points in the third quarter, finishing with 43 total. One of the gutsiest performances in NBA history. Still, with just seconds left, the Lakers fed the ball to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He missed, barely touched by Laimbeer, but the refs called a phantom foul. Kareem hit both free throws. Lakers won Game 6. Game 7 was close, but with a hobbled Thomas, Detroit ran out of gas. The Lakers survived and claimed the title. But the league had taken notice. The Pistons were no longer just tough. They were great, and the NBA video team dubbed them with a new nickname, the Bad Boys. Isaiah Thomas wasn't offended. He just smiled and said, "I guess we are." The Pistons and Laimbeer embraced it, and the league was about to pay the price. By 1989, the Detroit Pistons weren't chasing anyone anymore. They were the ones being hunted. Armed with the league's most physical defense and a team-wide commitment to controlled violence, the Pistons went from hard-nosed underdogs to undisputed villains of the NBA. And no one embraced that role more than Bill Laimbeer. The season was historic. Detroit won a franchise record 63 games, and Laimbeer continued redefining what it meant to be a modern center. He averaged more than 1 3-point attempt per game, rare for a big man in that era, and hit them at a solid 35% clip. His ability to drag opposing centers out of the paint opened up driving lanes for Thomas and Dumars, turning the Pistons into an offensive machine without compromising their bruising identity. They crushed Boston in the playoffs, swept the Bucks, and once again faced Michael Jordan and the Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals. And this is where the legend of the Jordan rules was born. Chuck Daly, understanding that Jordan was the most explosive player on earth, developed a set of unofficial defensive commandments. No layups. No rhythm. Hit him on the drive. Trap him on the perimeter. Make him feel pain. Laimbeer was one of the architects of that pain. If Jordan made it to the rim, he knew Laimbeer was waiting with an elbow, a shove, or a body check. The plan worked. The Pistons won in 6, advancing to the NBA Finals for the second straight year. This time, fate worked in their favor. The Lakers lost Byron Scott before Game 1. Then, in Game 3, Magic Johnson pulled his hamstring and couldn't continue. With Kareem pushing 42, the Pistons had their moment, and they seized it. They swept the Lakers. Bill Laimbeer and the Detroit Pistons were finally NBA champions. But they weren't satisfied. In 1990, Rick Mahorn was lost to the expansion draft, but Dennis Rodman stepped up, winning Defensive Player of the Year. Laimbeer, meanwhile, remained the team's enforcer and provocateur. He got into fights with Charles Barkley, enraged entire fan bases, and continued to deliver those accidental, cheap shots that made him so loved in Detroit and hated everywhere else. Detroit returned to the finals and beat the Portland Trail Blazers in 5 games. Laimbeer had 17 rebounds in the series-clinching Game 5, disrupting Portland's entire offensive rhythm. While Isaiah Thomas took home Finals MVP, it was Laimbeer who had broken Portland's composure with his constant grabbing, holding, and illegal screens. Back-to-back championships. The bad boys ruled the NBA. But the league and the Pistons were changing. In 1991, Laimbeer increased his three-point volume again, hitting 36% from deep. But his overall impact was fading. The Pistons still won 50 games, but something was off. They barely escaped early playoff rounds and once again faced the Chicago Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals. This time, the Bulls were ready. Jordan was stronger, smarter, and had a better team behind him. Detroit's intimidation tactics didn't work. The Bulls swept them in 4 games. And then came the most infamous moment in Pistons history. With just seconds left in Game 4, Laimbeer, Isaiah Thomas, and the rest of the Pistons starters walked off the court without shaking hands. No congratulations. No eye contact. Just a bitter exit, broadcast to millions. It was one of the most controversial acts in sports history. Universally condemned, except in Detroit. And symbolically, it marked the end of the bad boys. In the following years, the Pistons fell apart. They lost in the first round in 1992, missed the playoffs in 1993, and by 1994, the team was in shambles. During a practice that year, Laimbeer fouled Isaiah Thomas hard for the second time in 2 weeks. Thomas finally snapped. He punched Laimbeer and broke his own hand. Even teammates were exhausted with Laimbeer's antics. Shortly after that, realizing the team was going nowhere and that his own body was fading, Laimbeer retired just 11 games into the 1993-94 season. He left the game as one of the most hated and respected figures of his time. So, was he really the dirtiest player in NBA history? Probably. But also one of the smartest. He played to his strengths, understood the psychology of the game, and never cared what outsiders thought. In his own words, "People can say whatever they want about the way I played, but they have to say this: I'm a winner." And that's the truth. Bill Laimbeer was a 4-time All-Star, 2-time NBA champion, and part of one of the most legendary teams ever assembled. Love him or loathe him, you couldn't ignore him.